1. Introduction: A man of contradictions and convictions. To understand the birth of the United States, one must grapple with a cast of characters as varied and complex as the nation they sought to create. Among them, John Adams stands out, not perhaps as the most dashing or universally beloved, but certainly as one of the most intellectually formidable and stubbornly principled. He was a man of fascinating contradictions, a passionate revolutionary who feared the unbridled passions of the mob, a lover of liberty who warned ceaselessly against its excesses, a quintessential man of the people who profoundly distrusted their collective judgment. To explore John Adams is to explore the central tension of the American experiment itself. How to build a government strong enough to endure, yet constrained enough to remain free. Section 2. The Forge of a Revolutionary. From Braintree to Independence. Born in 1735 in the modest town of Braintree, Massachusetts, John Adams was not a product of the landed aristocracy that dominated so many of the southern colonies. He was the son of a deacon. He was the son of a farmer, a product of the hard-working, devout, fiercely independent culture of New England. This upbringing instilled in him a powerful work ethic and an abiding respect for community, but also a certain prickliness and an impatience with airs and graces. His path was one of intellect and diligence. After graduating from Harvard, he chose a career in law. Section 3. The Diplomat's Mind: Observing Europe's Old Order. Following the Declaration of Independence, John Adams' service to the fledgling nation took him across the Atlantic, plunging him into the very heart of European diplomacy. His time in France, the Netherlands, and Great Britain was not merely a mission to secure loans and alliances. It was a profound political education. In the glittering courts of Paris and in the stuffy salons of Paris, he observed a society teetering on the brink of cataclysmic change. He saw firsthand an aristocracy dripping with wealth and privilege, entirely disconnected from the struggles of the common people. This experience did not fill him with revolutionary zeal for the French model. On the contrary, it reinforced his conviction that a society divided into such extreme orders, with a powerless populace and an unaccountable nobility, was inherently unstable and destined for turmoil. His mission in the Netherlands proved more congenial to his temperament. There he found a republic, a nation of merchants and bankers, whose society was built on commerce and a degree of civic order. He labored tirelessly to secure recognition of the United States and, crucially, a substantial loan that was vital to the American war effort. His success in Holland was a testament to his dogged persistence, a quality his European counterparts often found abrasive, but could not help but respect. Yet even in the Dutch Republic he saw potential dangers. He noted the constant friction between the wealthy oligarchs who dominated the government and the popular factions who felt excluded. While in Britain he had a front-row seat to the workings of its famed mixed constitution: monarchy, the king; aristocracy, the House of Lords; democracy, the House of Commons. He admired its stability and the liberties it secured, even as he had fought against its imperial application. He saw it as a flawed but functioning example of the principles he advocated. This long sojourn in Europe was the crucible in which his masterwork was forged, a defense of the constitutions of government of the United States of America. Section 4. The Architect's Blueprint: A Defense of the Constitutions, written between 1786 and 1787 in London. Adams serving as a diplomat. A defense is a monumental 3-volume work, not a single cohesive argument, more an encyclopedic survey. Its immediate purpose: counter French thinkers like Turgot. Turgot criticized state constitutions for dividing power. He and other radicals favored a single unicameral legislature. They claimed it would perfectly represent a unified popular will. Adams saw this as a recipe for disaster. The core: an argument for mixed and balanced government. Adams draws on many historical sources: ancient Greece, ancient Rome, Italian city-states of the Renaissance, cantons of Switzerland. He shows republics concentrating power tended to descend into chaos, factionalism, and ultimately tyranny. The will of the people, he argued, was never a single unified thing. Society was divided into orders or classes: the many, the common people; the few, the wealthy, well-born and talented, the aristocracy. Each group had its own interests and ambitions. Left unchecked, each would seek to dominate the others. To prevent destruction, Adams prescribed separation of powers. He advocated three distinct branches as mutual checks. First, a bicameral legislature of two houses. One house, the Assembly, for the democratic many; the other, the Senate, for the aristocratic few, each given voice and veto to manage competing ambitions. Second, a strong independent executive with veto power, an executive as neutral arbiter and balance wheel. Finally, an independent judiciary, judges serving for life. Their role: interpret laws and constrain legislature and executive. By dividing power, Adams believed no single person, group, or branch of government could accumulate enough authority to become tyrannical. The system wasn't to empower popular will directly, but to filter and refine it, to slow government down and encourage compromise and deliberation. It was, in his view, the only realistic way to build a republic that could last. At the very heart of John Adams's political thought lies a sober and unflinching assessment of human nature. Unlike some optimistic Enlightenment thinkers who believed humanity was inherently good and could be perfected through reason and education, Adams held a more traditional, almost Calvinist view. He saw human beings as driven by a complex mix of virtues and vices. While capable of reason, justice, benevolence, they were also motivated by powerful passions: ambition, envy, rivalry, a relentless desire for distinction, and a drive for power. From this psychological premise flowed his entire theory of government. If the drive for power was permanent, the challenge was not to design a system that assumed men were angels, but one that could function even though they were not. The weakness of human nature made government necessary. A government that ignored these passions was doomed. Pure democracy would let majority passions run rampant, oppressing minorities and collapsing order. A small, unelected elite would become a self-serving oligarchy. This led to his central idea, the necessity of balance. Society contains a natural aristocracy, to the wealthier, more talented, more ambitious than the common people, the many. The only way to ensure liberty was to pit these groups against each other in government. Give each group its own chamber, the Senate for the aristocracy, the House for the democracy, and their ambitions will check and cancel each other out. Power opposed to power, interest to interest. This was not cynical but realistic, a mechanism to harness flawed human nature for stable justice. The framework required a strong, independent executive as balancer. The president, apart from legislative battles, would mediate and protect the nation. The executive's veto was not anti-democratic, but an essential shield, preventing either chamber from imposing its will unjustly on the other. This intricate clockwork of checks and balances had one purpose: to subordinate government of men to a government of laws. By dispersing power, no individual or faction could rise above the law. Section 6. The French Revolution, a mirror of American fears. When the Bastille fell in 1789, many Americans, including Thomas Jefferson, celebrated it as the dawn of a new age of liberty, a sister revolution to their own. They saw the French people rising up against monarchical tyranny and aristocratic privilege. Their hearts swelled with sympathy and hope. John Adams, however, watched the unfolding events in France with profound and growing alarm. From the very beginning, he was deeply skeptical. He did not see a measured move toward constitutional government. Instead, he saw an explosive release of pent-up rage and utopian idealism that he feared would consume itself in violence. His study of history had taught him revolutions driven by abstract philosophy and popular fury rather than by established law, and tradition rarely ended well, as the French Revolution grew more radical, turning from constitutional monarchy to the reign of terror. Adams's worst fears were realized. He was horrified by the mass executions, the summary justice of the revolutionary tribunals, and the elevation of the guillotine into an instrument of state policy. He saw it as the terrifying, real-world manifestation of the very theories he had argued against in his defense. The French had adopted a system with a single, all-powerful National Assembly, precisely the kind of unchecked democratic body that Turgot had praised and Adams had condemned. The result, as he had predicted, was not liberty, but a new and more brutal form of tyranny, wielded by demagogues who claimed to speak for the people while slaughtering their opponents. For Adams, the French Revolution became a crucial cautionary tale, a stark contrast to the American experience. The American Revolution, he believed, had been a success because it was fundamentally a conservative movement aimed at preserving existing rights and establishing a government based on historical models and the rule of law. It had been led by practical men who understood the need for checks and balances. Section 7, the presidency, navigating the storm of radicalism. Ascending to the presidency in 1797, John Adams inherited a nation deeply divided, caught in the crossfire between Britain and revolutionary France. His entire term in office can be seen as an effort to steer the young republic through these treacherous waters, applying his principles of balance and moderation in the face of intense domestic and foreign pressure. He was immediately confronted with the quasi-war with France, an undeclared naval conflict. French privateers were seizing American ships. The more radical wing of his own Federalist Party, led by Alexander Hamilton, clamored for a full-scale war, seeing it as an opportunity to crush the pro-French Republicans and align America firmly with Great Britain. In this crisis, Adams demonstrated his commitment to his role as a national arbiter, a leader who must stand above factional passions. Despite immense pressure from his own party, he resisted the calls for war. He understood that a major conflict would be disastrous for the young, fragile nation, potentially leading to a massive standing army, high taxes, and a dangerous expansion of executive power. The very things revolutionaries had fought against. Instead, he pursued a difficult and unpopular path of diplomacy, building up the American Navy to defend the nation's interests while simultaneously sending peace envoys to France. This decision ultimately cost him the support of the hawkish wing of the Federalist Party and contributed to his political downfall, but he always considered it his proudest achievement as president. However, his presidency is also remembered for one of the most controversial acts in American history, the Alien and Sedition Acts of 1798. Passed by a Federalist-dominated Congress amid war hysteria, these laws gave the president the power to deport foreigners deemed dangerous and made it a crime to publish false writing, scandalous writing, malicious writing against the government. To his critics then and now, these acts were a gross betrayal of the principles of the Revolution, a clear violation of free speech and a tool to suppress political opposition. For Adams, who signed the bills into law, they were likely seen as a necessary, if distasteful, emergency measure to protect the nation from foreign agents and domestic subversion at a time when he believed the country was on the brink of war and internal collapse. The passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts reveals the central dilemma of Adams's philosophy when put into practice. His deep-seated fear of instability and the unchecked passions of the mob led him to sanction measures that restricted the very liberties he otherwise sought to protect. He believed that order was the necessary precondition for liberty and that in moments of extreme peril, the government must have the power to defend itself against those who would destroy it through slander and sedition. While he never personally ordered a prosecution under the Sedition Act, his signature on the legislation has forever stained his reputation and stands as a stark example of how the fear of radicalism can lead even a principled leader to compromise on fundamental freedoms. Section 8. Critics and Legacy, the enduring debate on Adams's vision. Throughout his political life and for centuries after, John Adams has been a figure of intense debate. His critics have often portrayed him as an elitist, a monarchist at heart who distrusted the common person and sought to create an American aristocracy. His great rival, Thomas Jefferson, praised the wisdom of the people and trusted agrarian democracy. Jefferson was cast as the heroic champion of liberty, with Adams as the grumpy, pessimistic counterpoint. Critics point to his writings on the natural aristocracy, and they cite the Alien and Sedition Acts. These criticisms often stem from a fundamental misunderstanding of his arguments. Adams did not advocate for an aristocracy. He observed one would inevitably arise: wealth, talent, fame. His goal was not to empower this group, but to contain it within a constitutional framework, where its influence could be balanced by the democratic power of the common people. He was not a monarchist, but a staunch Republican who believed a strong independent executive was necessary to prevent the legislature from becoming an all-powerful oligarchy. His vision was far more complex than his detractors often allowed, rooted in a deep reading of history rather than a simple preference for elite rule. His supporters see him as a clear-eyed realist whose warnings against the dangers of unchecked democracy are more relevant than ever. They argue Adams correctly identified the enduring threat of factionalism, the tyranny of the majority. They see in his advocacy for checks and balances, the rule of law, a strong constitution, as timeless wisdom that has helped the United States avoid so many failed republics. His decision to make peace with France, at great personal political cost, is held up as a model of statesmanship, placing the long-term interests of the country above re-election. For his admirers, Adams is the unsung hero of the founding, whose sober pragmatism provided the ballast that kept the American ship of state afloat. In a sense, the enduring legacy of John Adams lies in this very debate. He forces us to confront uncomfortable questions about the nature of democracy. Is the will of the people always just? What are the proper limits of free speech in a time of crisis? How can a society balance the demand for equality with the reality of human inequality? Adams did not provide easy answers. Instead, he provided a framework for thinking about these problems. His life's work serves as a permanent reminder that liberty is not self-sustaining. It requires carefully designed institutions, a respect for the rule of law, and a citizenry that understands the delicate balance between freedom and order. Section 9. Conclusion: the unfashionable founder and his lasting questions. In the grand narrative of the American founding, John Adams often plays a supporting role. He lacks the military grandeur of Washington. He lacks the rhetorical grace of Jefferson. He lacks the roguish charm of Franklin. He was, as he himself knew, obnoxious. He was suspected. He was unpopular. Yet his intellectual contribution to the stability and endurance of the American Republic is second to none. He was the great theorist of constitutional architecture. He insisted on building the house on a foundation of stone. Others were content to build on the more romantic, but ultimately less stable, sands of popular passion. His primary achievement was not in leading a radical charge. It was in stopping one before it could undermine the entire revolutionary project. His great fear was that the American Revolution would follow the path of so many others in history, devolving from a noble quest for liberty into a chaotic struggle for power, ending in the tyranny of a single despot, or ending in the tyranny of a raging mob. He stood against the radical Enlightenment idea that society could be perfected overnight by tearing down old institutions. Instead, he championed a more conservative, evolutionary approach to change. Change grounded in law, change grounded in history, change grounded in a realistic appraisal of human nature. His defense of the constitutions was his intellectual barricade against utopianism. It was a plea for moderation, for balance, for institutional complexity in an age that often craved radical simplicity. The twilight of his life brought a remarkable reconciliation. After years of bitter political rivalry, he and Thomas Jefferson renewed their friendship. they renewed it through a series of profound and moving letters. In this correspondence, the two old revolutionaries reflected on the nation they had helped create. One was the pragmatist, the other was the idealist. It is a fitting coda to a life spent in intellectual combat.